Cast your minds back to February, when Pedro Pascal was officially announced as Joel Miller, the grizzled protagonist of HBO's adaptation of The Last of Us. Reaction was, mixed, to say the least. In the games, Joel is sort of your classic all-American boy, a gruff Texan construction worker who plays the guitar and wears his emotions on whatever the opposite of a sleeve is. Pedro Pascal, on the other hand, is, he's not that. Yeah, he's not that. When I first heard about the casting, my honest reaction was, weird choice. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it was sort of genius. It's genius because of what the original game, The Last of Us, is about, and what emotions it tries to elicit in its players. It's genius because it plays with the audience's expectations of who they're meant to be rooting for. It's genius because Pedro Pascal is the Mandalorian. Now, if you've been living under a rock, The Mandalorian is a TV show set in the Star Wars universe starring Pedro Pascal as the titular Mandalorian. He's a quiet, violent mercenary with a long-dead family who goes around doing odd jobs and being badass but sad. That is, until one day he takes on the responsibility of protecting a young child with a unique genetic ability and escorting them across the galaxy to somewhere their ability can be used for the greater good. Along the way, the gruff mercenary and the child bond, the mercenary gradually loosens up and begins to show genuine emotions and develop a real emotional attachment to the child. That is, until bad people show up and kidnap the child for use in medical experiments to try and extract its special genetic ability, and the gruff mercenary has to go on a desperate last mission in order to save the child. The end. Now, that's a pretty basic plot description of The Mandalorian, and for those who've played it, it's also a pretty goddamn good description of The Last of Us. Depressed and withdrawn mercenary softens up upon bonding with a child and then goes out for revenge when child is taken away by people who want it for its special genetic properties. Sure, in one the child is a 50-year-old frog person who can move things with his mind, and in the other the child is a 14-year-old lesbian who loves puns, but they both fulfill near identical roles in the broad story structure. Joel Miller isn't part of a religious order that makes it forbidden to ever remove your helmet, and he doesn't have a blaster pistol, and he doesn't fight giant sandworms, but he is a badass mercenary with an affinity for children and a tragic past involving his family being killed. The Mandalorian's family were killed by droids, and Joel's family were killed by soldiers, but they both had their families taken away by faceless authority figures. They're obviously not the exact same character, but they've got fairly similar arcs. It's all part of the larger trend of journey with your dad simulators, with stuff like the God of War reboot. Stories that happen when young creatives hit their 30s, 40s, 50s, have children and start to think, God damn I'm old, but I love my child and I would totally kill zombies, / giant sandworms, / the Norse pantheon in order to protect them. The reason this connection is important is because The Mandalorian is popular. People watched it, people loved it, and people got attached to Baby Yoda and bought Baby Yoda toys and Baby Yoda bedsheets and Baby Yoda pajamas and Baby Yoda Funko Pops and Baby Yoda backpacks and Baby Yoda mood lamps and Baby Yoda, and generally just spent the GDP of a small country on merchandise depicting that horrible little gremlin. Whew, okay. The point is that millions of people are going to recognise Pedro Pascal. They're going to recognise that he's playing roughly the same character, and they're going to watch HBO's The Last of Us in droves and root for their cool Baby Yoda protecting badass mercenary guy to protect this little girl. Even Pedro Pascal's breakout role as Oberyn Martell in Game of Thrones saw him as a badass warrior who was deeply protective of his younger family members. Sure, in that the children were already dead, but it's just another string to Pedro Pascal's bow as man who plays badass people who are protective of children. But the thing is, The Mandalorian is a show that loves its main character. He's the hero, he's got a heart of gold, he protects the weak and slays evil wherever he finds it. It's a show about standing up against evil and fighting for what you believe in, as essentially all Star Wars media is. The Last of Us, on the other hand, is a game about the slow decline of the human race and what individuals do in order to cope with it. For those who don't know, the specific details of The Last of Us' story are that Joel is hired to escort Ellie across the country by a rebel group called the Fireflies. It's a post-apocalyptic zombie hellscape out there, so it's a bit tricky and takes a long time. During the journey, Joel learns Ellie is in fact immune to the zombie infection, and the reason for their journey is to get her to a doctor that could theoretically use her to synthesize a zombie cure or vaccine. During the journey, Joel begins to see Ellie as a replacement for his daughter Sarah, who was killed during the initial outbreak. He glances at his broken watch when around her, a gift from his long-dead daughter.
Can't deny that view. Come on, this way.
Here,
What's this?
your birthday? You kept complaining about your broken watch. So I figured, you know. You like it?
And starts to call Ellie baby girl, which is the same endearment he used for Sarah.
Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on.
Not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
And
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here. You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
No.
Come on, baby girl. I got you. I got you.
Their relationship is, at least partly, an unhealthy projection by Joel, replacing his dead daughter with someone who reminds him of her. And he goes to extreme lengths to protect her, murdering hundreds of people and horrifically torturing prisoners without a second thought to get information that could help him protect her. Throughout the story, he lets slip details about his past that tells the audience he has killed and tortured people before to survive.
What girl? I don't know no girl. Fuck! Focus right here, right here. I'll pop your goddamn knee off.
how did you know
Know what?
about the ambush?
I've been on both sides.
So, there are a lot of innocent people? We'll take that as a yes.
Take it however you want.
And a lot of them were innocent, or at least as innocent as you can really be in a zombie apocalypse. For a film or a TV show, it's pretty normal to have a protagonist like this, a morally dubious guy who the audience isn't necessarily meant to root for. You got Breaking Bad, American Psycho, Joker, The Sopranos, House of Cards, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Mad Men, The Wolf of Wall Street, Hannibal, the list goes on and on and on and on. But video games aren't really that mature, or at least they weren't back in the wistful years of 2013 when The Last of Us was released. In terms of major games where the protagonist is the villain, you're generally limited to either overtly comic stuff like Fable, Overlord, or Bulletstorm, weird alt-world timelines like the Battle for Middle-earth, or stuff like The Force Unleashed where you start evil but end up siding with the good guys in the end. Stuff like Far Cry 3 and Crackdown were slipping in little clues that the player character was in the wrong, but they weren't exactly Taxi Driver. So in general, when The Last of Us came out, video games expected you to like and side with the player character, or at the very least not care about them because you were too busy no-scoping terrorists in brown corridors. What I think The Last of Us did that was so clever was they played with that audience expectation that you're supposed to like and agree with the player character. When you get right down to brass tacks, The Last of Us 1 is an incredibly simple story of incredibly predictable character development, but it blew people away back in 2013. It was a critical darling and continues to be one of people's favourite game narratives of all time. Hell, it's definitely in my top 5. And a lot of critics, I think, look at this overwhelmingly positive reaction to a relatively simple story executed competently, and they think, bah, gamers are all idiots who wax lyrical about the sort of stories that films have been doing for decades. And yeah, they're sort of right. It was partly so well received, just because most of what came before was so simple and surface level, that anything with the teeniest bit of nuance was seen as revolutionary in the gaming world. Ironically, I've also seen a lot of critique from more video game focused critics who say Last of Us tries too hard to be cinematic and may as well just be a movie. And yeah, a lot of the game is just cutscenes and acting with a capital A. But The Last of Us also relied on the fact it was a game to tell its story. There's one particular moment I always think of in The Last of Us, which I've never seen talked about, but which is such a good demonstration of what I mean. All throughout the game, there are puzzles where you and Ellie have to work together to access a new area. Maybe you help her cross a flooded tunnel on a raft, or maybe you give her a boost so she can drop a rope down to you. It's a good bonding time for the two characters and gives players something to do that isn't just harrowing violence, but it usually amounts to pressing a button and solving the puzzle. This happens literally dozens of times throughout the game, and is as much of a mechanic as shooting your gun or sneaking past enemies. You press a button, Ellie runs up as if she teleported there, and boom, you solve the puzzle. Again and again and again. Pressing the button, Ellie runs up, boom, you solve the puzzle. Again and again and again. It gets drilled into you, and honestly gets pretty repetitive and boring near the end.
Alright, I need you to...
I know. Step on the fucking pallet.
You've reached what feels like the end of the game, and you and Ellie have just gone through some absolutely harrowing shit with a group of cannibal bandits. You feel the end in sight, and then you spot it. A ladder, just out of reach, with a button prompt right below, an opportunity for Joel to give Ellie a boost if you've ever seen one. Well, we could use that ladder, says Joel,
Well, we could use that ladder.
drilling it into the player's big dumb head that they should solve the puzzle the exact same way they've done it 1,000
Here we
times
go.
before. You approach the wall, you press the triangle button, Joel braces himself to give Ellie a boost, and... nothing. Joel looks up. His expression falls, and the camera
Ellie?
pans across to reveal Ellie,
Ladder.
alone on a bench, staring at the ground. He gives a little encouragement, and she snaps out of her reverie and suddenly comes and helps you. Now, it's not a big scene. There's not big acting or crying or shouting. No one's going to win an award for it. But it's significant because it only works in a video game. It only works because you've been trained by the game to expect a certain response when you press triangle. Ellie teleports up and helps you pass the puzzle. Maybe a little achievement symbol pops up and your brain gets a cheeky little spike of dopamine. But this scene elevates it, just a little, just a touch, by snapping you out of that press button to get dopamine mindset and suggesting that Ellie is an independent person with her own internal world. I mean, she isn't, of course. She's as scripted as you can possibly get. But that momentary little mix-up of how the game mechanic works shows you her headspace in that moment, that she's struggling and that Joel doesn't really know what to do about it. You can do that exact same scene in a TV adaptation, but it won't have the same impact. This moment is, of course, followed by the iconic giraffe scene, the scene where all the horrors of what she and Joel have seen and had done to them wash away for a few beautiful moments as you watch these magnificent creatures with wonder and awe. This moment obviously gets talked about a lot because it's iconic, but the player's satisfaction in that moment is amplified by the jolt of an unexpected change just moments before. Now, I've been blathering on about ladders and giraffes for a few minutes now, and you're probably wondering what all this has to do with Pedro Pascal. Well, the reason is because of The Last of Us' ending. I first played the game in 2016, a few years after it came out, and I knew people had strong feelings about the ending. So I went in expecting either Joel or Ellie to die in some suitably tragic way, and prepared myself to feel sad about losing one of these characters I'd spent so long getting attached to. And in a sense I did. If you don't know, the ending sees Joel's mission succeed as you reach the Fireflies and they begin to go about using Ellie to make a vaccine. Then Joel is told that Ellie will have to be killed so they can extract the necessary samples they need.
Once they remove it, they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine. A vaccine.
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
Find someone else.
And Joel snaps.
I ain't got time for this. Where? Top floor, the far end.
The whole last mission is you cutting your way through room after room of Fireflies to get to Ellie and get her out. Vaccine be damned. Ellie's asleep throughout this whole process, and the game ends on this really intriguing, uncomfortable conversation between Joel and Ellie, where he lies to her, tells her that making a vaccine was impossible.
Swear to me that everything that you said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
And just leaves you with Ellie's doubt and uncertainty. Now, part of the reason this ending works as well as it does is because, as I was saying earlier, video games expect that you will like and relate to the player character. Of course they do. A movie with an arsehole main character only requires you to watch their actions, so you can enjoy it as an observer. A game requires you to participate, to actively take control and do arseholish things. Unless you got some comedy like GTA or Borderlands or whatever to soften that blow, it's tough to just exist in the skin of someone who's a horrible human being for hours and hours. And that's why I think The Last of Us is so good, because Joel is awful. but you don't really question his actions for most of the game because he's the player character. This is a video game and he's the protagonist, so at worst he must just be an anti-hero. Sure, he says early on that he used to kill innocent people, but that's his tragic backstory. He's not like that anymore. Okay, sure, he tortures that guy by prying off his kneecap with a knife, but that guy belonged to a group of cannibals. They're killing innocent people in order to survive. That means it's okay to pry his kneecap off. Wait. And then at the end of the game, when you're just stabbing people in the throat and shooting doctors in the face and throwing Molotovs at guards who are just trying to create a better world, you start to think, oh shit, I'm the bad guy. Or at least, I'm a bad guy. Joel's no better or no worse than all the other murderers and rapists and cannibals in this horrible world, and you probably like them just as much if you spent the same amount of time with them. And yet, there's definitely arguments to be made that maybe killing Ellie wouldn't have resulted in a vaccine, and maybe killing a single person isn't worth it no matter the potential benefits. And yes, the Fireflies could have at least offered Ellie the choice, because she almost certainly would have said yes because she wanted to matter.
She needed her immunity to mean something.
If you're the sort of person who thinks Joel did nothing wrong, I'm not trying to take that away from you. It's a legitimate moral question. But I definitely wouldn't invite that guy to a dinner party.
I'll pop your goddamn knee off.
And because it's a video game, because you go in more or less expecting to side with the characters, it hits all the harder. Because your perspective shifts, and this guy you initially thought of as a cool, gruff country singer with a heart of gold turns into a mass murderer who's lying to the face of the little girl who he sees as a replacement for his dead daughter. But it only works so well as a game. It works because audiences went in expecting a fun time being a badass post-apocalypse warrior who kills people and is cool, and they left feeling conflicted and potentially unsatisfied. But any hypothetical live-action adaptation doesn't have that advantage. Let's say, for instance, theoretically, an HBO miniseries adaptation of The Last of Us created by Chernobyl and Scary Movie 4 writer Craig Mathison wouldn't have these advantages. A TV show doesn't involve actually performing those actions yourself. It doesn't force the audience to actually kill or be killed to protect Ellie. It doesn't let the audience press the button prompt to ask Ellie for help. Sure, audiences can get attached to characters who they're not meant to get attached to. See every post about people thinking Walter White was a cool guy with an annoying wife. But it's impossible to put the audiences directly into a character's shoes. Joel performing a horrific act of violence is just part of the gameplay loop, something gamers have become desensitized to ever since the original Doom. But it's going to come across a lot more unhinged to an audience who's just finished watching Bake Off.
Started making it, had a breakdown. Bon appetit!
How do you go about making an audience empathise with, like, and wholeheartedly support a character who spends most of his screen time either being quiet, rude, or violent? How can you get an audience to instinctively trust a character who doesn't really emote or talk about his feelings? A character who seems violent and mercenary on the surface, but perhaps you can see a heart of gold beneath their hard exterior. A character whose better qualities start to surface when they bond with a young child, and who would do absolutely anything to save that child when they get taken for use in sinister medical experiments. Enter stage left, it's Pedro Pascal! He's the Mandalorian, he's the Viper, he's about as typecast as a gruff mercenary with a soft spot for children as you can get, and he's actually the best casting choice I could possibly have imagined. Picture this, you're a 45-year-old wine mum. It's 9 in the evening, and you're watching the first episode of a new HBO show. You don't know a thing about video games, you call every game console the Nintendo, and you vaguely think The Last of Us is a Grover Washington song? It all seems a bit dark and grim, and the zombies aren't really your thing. But oh look, it's that nice young Mandalorian. Aww, his relationship with that girl is so sweet. He's such a kind dad like he was with that Baby Yoda. Skip ahead a few episodes and she'll just be cheering Joel on, spilling drops of red wine on the carpet while he pries some guy's kneecap off with a rusty screwdriver.
I'll pop your goddamn knee off.
She's in. She's committed. She's rooting for this violent, broken man because she knows that deep down he's a good man. And then she'll watch that good man kill dozens and dozens of people to protect Ellie from her captors, just like the Mandalorian did with Baby Yoda. But maybe this time it'll feel a little different, because it's doctors and nurses he's killing, not faceless stormtroopers. Maybe it'll niggle at the back of her mind that he's dooming countless people to horrific death, maybe the whole human race. And she'll remember that final scene of The Mandalorian, where childhood hero Luke Skywalker showed up to save the day and took Baby Yoda off to a better life somewhere. And she'll compare it to Ellie, confused and unsure and lied to. And maybe she'll start to see Pedro Pascal in a different light. Now, I could be completely wrong. Maybe the show will change every single story beat and it'll be nothing like the game. Maybe the show will end on Joel tragically dying while holding off a swarm of zombies, while Ellie synthesizes a vaccine with her blood and goes on to save the world. Maybe I'm just talking out of my arse. But you gotta admit, makes a lot of sense, right?